Welcome to Snooze and Stories. Imagine Athens at dawn, the same city that raised questions louder than the sea. The Acropolis stands aloof and noble, marble warmed by an early sun, the city's breath slow and steady. In a narrow street not far from the market, behind a plain doorway with a painted lintel, a child is born who will one day give voice to some of the deepest thoughts humanity will ever keep. They call him Aristocles at birth. They will call him Plato later, perhaps for his broad shoulders, perhaps for reasons lost to time and rumor. For now, he is a baby with a small, urgent cry, a new rhythm added to the chorus of Athens, a city of traders and poets, of fishermen and magistrates, of people who come together to speak and to decide. His family is well placed. They belong to Athens' old stock. His mother is Pericteon, a woman whose family roots touch the politics and stories of the city. His father, Ariston, is of a household that remembers old names and old honors. There is blood here that remembers tyrants and tyrannies, revolts and reconciliations. And yet, the household is not rich like the few who dine on silver. It is respectable, quietly connected to the life of the polis, enough to teach the child letters and songs, to send him to school, to place him near the noise and music of Athens itself. Young Aristocles grows up with the city at his threshold, the smell of olive oil and dust, the clink of amphorae, the caw of gulls from the harbor. These things enter him as surely as letters and songs. His first lessons are the old ones, Homer's verses recited until the rhythms live inside him, basic arithmetic and the shapes of letters traced on wax tablets. Music and gymnastics, the twin pillars of a Greek education meant to shape both thought and body. And yet, from early on, there is a look about him, a patient attention, like the slow witness of someone who prefers listening to the quick pleasure of speaking. While other boys boast of games and youthful prowess, Aristocles watches faces more than contests. He notices a crooked argument, a word that doesn't fit, the way someone's tone contradicts their words. He stores these little dissonances like a careful man collects shells. Athens in his youth is a city still echoing with triumph and shadow. The victories that once gave it confidence have become stories measured against the reality of loss. The Peloponnesian War is behind them, but its consequences hum in the stones. Political arguments are not only academic, they are survival. Men have died in their differences. The city is proud, fragile, talkative, suspicious. The perfect place to learn how words can build worlds and how words can topple them. As he grows, Aristocles meets teachers, men who promise knowledge in various forms. He meets mathematicians who see the world in number and proportion, men who believe that reason is a light to measure the cosmos. He meets poets who chant of gods and fate, spinning beauty and terror in the same breath. He meets rhetoricians, slick and brilliant, who teach the art of persuasion, how to make a weaker argument appear powerful, and how to charm a crowd. He meets musicians who understand harmony as a map of the soul. Each gives him a piece of the world. But none of these men will finally hold him. There is something about Aristocles that resists being taught like a statue is carved. He questions not only the claim of each teacher, but the frame they stand in. When the rhetorician insists that success is the measure of wisdom, the boy wonders, what becomes of a man who conquers the city but loses himself? When the mathematician speaks of forms and ratios, Aristocles feels the comfort of order, but wonders whether order alone makes a good life. The seeds of a larger curiosity are planted, curious about methods and meanings both. A figure appears in his life who will change everything. Socrates, the barefoot gadfly of the agora, with a face ordinary and a mind relentless. Perhaps they meet at the market, or in the shadowed colonnade, or through a mutual friend. The ways of such meetings are small, but their consequence is large.
Socrates is not a teacher in the old sense. He doesn't lecture with learned airs. He asks. He asks with a patient, cutting insistence that moves like water wearing down stone. For Aristocles, now young, thoughtful, and hungry, Socrates' method is not simply new, it is intoxicating. Socrates asks questions about the ordinary things the city takes for granted. What is justice, he asks? What is courage? What is the good life? He takes apart confident answers, not to humiliate, but to make people see their own assumptions. Some are angered, some are embarrassed. Others, like Aristocles, feel lit from within. In these conversations, something like a vocation forms. The boy who loved listening now loves the practice of inquiry, the disciplined, humble work of unearthing what people mean and often don't mean. At first, Aristocles is a fan, admired and attentive, recording the rhythm of Socrates' speech with an almost sacred care. The circle around Socrates is not a classroom, it is an agora of minds, a place where questions are given room to breathe. Plato, as he'll later be called, listens, sometimes following the line of an argument to its end, sometimes standing at the doorway between awe and confusion. He is not impressed by prestige, he is moved by the possibility that truth might be coaxed out of argument like water from a well.
The years pass, and with them another set of lessons. Plato watches Athens in its daily contradictions. He watches politicians rise and fall, the power of speech and the weakness of character. He watches how a city can honor law one day and mob rule the next. He learns that words are not only instruments of truth, but of desire, fear, and control. He begins to see philosophy not as mere speculation, but as a life practice, one that must be rooted in virtue, not merely skill. There are journeys, too, brief and meaningful. He travels when necessary, perhaps to see a sanctuary, perhaps to study with a mathematician who reads the world in perfect circles. Geometry, he discovers, is not only about shapes, but about a discipline of mind. The crispness of mathematical proof offers a model for thinking, clarity, necessity, and a kind of quiet certainty. He takes these habits into his questioning, seeking to combine the softness of inquiry with the rigor of demonstration. Yet there is tension. Socrates' influence awakens in him a spiritual and ethical hunger for something beyond the mere craft of argument. Plato begins to think that there may be deeper realities, patterns that underlie the shifting crowd of appearances. Where Socrates, with his dialectic asks and tests, Plato begins to imagine that there might be forms, stable truths that give shape to justice, beauty, and goodness. This is only the seed of an idea now, not yet articulated in the pages he will one day write, but the impulse is there. The sense that the world visible to our senses is a shadow of something clearer, truer, and more permanent. And always, Athens continues. The assembly convenes, the poets perform, markets open and close. Into these same streets enters the young man who will become Plato, a listener, a thinker, and someone increasingly convinced that the life of the mind can change the life of a city. He watches Plato's companions grow. Some will write, others will fight, some will betray, and some will be beloved. These are the early threads of what will become a long tapestry: friendship, thought, politics, and the cost of asking hard questions. So we end this first walk through his early life: the small house, the wax tablet, the recited Homer, the boy who listens. The image stays with us: a young Aristocles in the soft morning, the agora breathing around him, Socrates' questions like a slow tide changing the shape of the shore. Something inside him accepts a call to think, to question, to pursue a good life founded on truth. Pause now. Let the city sounds settle. Let the salt air of the Aegean grow faint. Breathe slowly. Let the idea of a young mind awakening, patient, attentive, and brave, sink gently into your thoughts. If you enjoy these historical stories, please consider giving this video a like and subscribing to the channel. Your support means everything.
And if you have suggestions for other historical figures, leave a comment below. Athens changes long before Plato understands the meaning of those changes. At first, the city's anxiety is only a shift in the air, a sharper tone in public debates, a restlessness in the marketplace, a feeling that the gods themselves are watching the polis with narrowed eyes. He is still young when the old stability of Athens breaks. The city that once stood proud and confident begins to quake in its foundations. Power struggles tighten like knots. Men whisper in corners. Decisions in the assembly echo with desperation. The long shadow of the Peloponnesian War still stretches across every street, a shadow Plato is grown up beneath, though he did not yet know how deeply it would shape him. He watches as factions form: Democrats, oligarchs, moderates, zealots. He learns early that politics is not a game of ideals, but a contest of fear and ambition. Even in his own household, the tension is visible. Members of his mother's family, once honored, now move carefully through the city as if the stones themselves might listen too closely. Plato sees the weight of lineage, the burden of reputation, the fragile line between public honor and public danger. Then comes the event that will carve the first deep line in his soul: the fall of Athens to Sparta. The proud walls that once echoed with confidence now echo with defeat. Spartan soldiers walk the streets, foreign, disciplined, silent. Austerity replaces the music of the city. The drama festivals dim. The agora feels smaller, as if even the marketplace is holding its breath. Plato, still barely a man, watches everything he knows tremble. And into this trembling city enters the tyranny of the 30.
Critias, a relative of Plato's, brilliant, sharp-tongued, and ruthless, becomes one of its leaders. For a moment, Plato believes he is witnessing the rise of a wiser order, a chance for philosophers to guide the polis. But ideals crack quickly under the pressure of power. The 30 rule with suspicion and violence. Lists are drawn, property is seized, men vanish, fear becomes the city's new vocabulary. Plato, who once believed that noble blood and noble ideas were enough to create justice, now sees what ambition without virtue becomes. He watches Critias speak eloquently and order executions with the same breath. He sees talented men twist themselves to survive. He hears the silence of those too afraid to speak. And through all of this moves Socrates, calm, barefoot, unbending. Socrates refuses to join the tyranny. He refuses to flatter it. He refuses to act unjustly even when ordered. This defiance confuses Plato at first. Why would a man risk his life over principle when compliance would ensure safety? But the older man's quiet courage strikes something deep in him. Socrates stands in the storm like a stone that will not shift. He will not arrest an innocent man. He will not praise the rulers. He will not pretend. Plato watches, transfixed. Something like a revelation stirs in him, that philosophy, if it means anything at all, must be lived, even when living it is dangerous. When the 30 finally fall, Athens swings back toward democracy. The city rejoices, exhausted and wounded. Plato hopes for renewal, but the democracy he sees restored is fragile, vengeful, still trembling from the memory of tyranny. The soul of the city is cracked, and the crack widens when the assembly turns its gaze towards Socrates. The accusations buzz through Athens like flies, corrupting the youth, impiety, disrespecting the city's gods. Plato listens in disbelief. He feels outrage rise in him like fire. This man, this steady, humble, questioning soul, is now cast as a public threat. Plato sits in the courtroom during the trial. He watches Socrates speak with calm clarity, refusing to flatter the jurors, refusing to beg. He listens to the arguments, the evasions, the fear disguised as righteousness. He sees the fragile machinery of democracy misfire. The verdict strikes like a blow.
Socrates is condemned. Plato feels the city shift again, this time not from war, nor tyranny, nor famine, but from a quiet sickness inside the soul of Athens, a sickness of misunderstanding, of insecurity, of fear of truth itself. When Socrates refuses escape, when he drinks the cup of hemlock with serenity, something inside Plato fractures and reforms. The man who had been his mentor becomes his martyr. The city that raised him becomes a place he must now question with a philosopher's suspicion. In that moment, Plato learns something he will spend the rest of his life exploring, that a city without philosophy becomes cruel, and a philosophy without courage becomes useless. Athens mourns. Plato mourns deeper. The agora seems emptier than ever. The conversations that once danced through its colonnades feel thin, echoing with absence. The man who taught him how to think has been silenced by men who feared thinking. Plato realizes he cannot stay. Not yet. Not while the wound is fresh. Not while every street reminds him of a cup lifted calmly to a pair of wise, unafraid lips. So he prepares to leave Athens, to wander, to study, to learn from other lands, carrying with him the ghost of Socrates, the scar of injustice, and the seed of a vision that will one day become a new kind of philosophy and a new kind of school. But that is for the next chapter. The city is quiet in a way Athens was never meant to be. Not the quiet of dawn, nor the quiet of the sea before a wind, but the quiet of something broken. The trial is over. The hemlock has been drunk. The final words have been spoken. And Plato, still young, still filled with the heat of promise, walks through streets that feel strangely emptied, as if the soul of Athens has slipped out between its stones. Socrates is gone. The man whose questions shaped Plato's mind, whose voice steadied his doubts, whose presence seemed immovable even against the tides of politics, silenced. Not by argument, not by reason, but by the will of a frightened city. Plato's grief is not loud. It settles inside him like a deep, cold tide. He does not shout in the streets. He does not argue with the jurors. He does not demand justice from those who refuse to understand the man he revered. Instead, he watches. He listens. And he carries the weight of the event like a stone warmed by memory. He had been there, not in the courtroom, for Socrates forbade some of his friends from speaking on his behalf, but present in spirit as the drama unfolded. He heard the rumors, the arguments, the speeches. He learned how easily crowds can turn, how quickly confidence can collapse into fear, how fragile truth can be when swallowed by opinion. And so Plato steps away. Not forever, not out of cowardice, but because Athens is now a wound too raw to touch. The city that once shaped him now feels like a place where thinking has become dangerous, where philosophy itself seems unwelcome, a dangerous luxury in a world ruled by passion and suspicion. So he travels. Where does he go first? Different stories differ. Some say Megara, to the house of Euclid, where thinkers gather quietly, like delicate flames protected from the wind. Others say he journeys farther, to Cyrene to study mathematics, to Egypt to listen to old priests speak of ancient rites, to Italy, where the Pythagoreans live in numbers and harmony. But whether each journey is literal or partly woven from legend, the truth beneath them remains. Plato seeks distance and clarity. Travel is its own teacher. He finds that other cities live differently, other minds reason differently, other lands remember truths older than Greek politics, older than Athenian pride. In Egypt, he sees order, temples built not for debate, but for eternity. In Cyrene, he finds precision, geometry turned into a discipline as sharp as a blade. Among the Pythagoreans, he hears whispers of something he already sensed, that reality might have patterns beneath its surface, invisible but profound, like a hidden music directing all things. These whispers shape him. They do not turn him away from Socrates, nothing could, but they help him imagine what Socrates himself never fully articulated, that truth might have structure, form, order, and that philosophy might not only question, but build. Years pass. Athens softens. Wounds scar over, though they never disappear. Plato returns. He walks the same roads, but he is not the same man. The grief has matured into purpose. The shock of Socrates' death has become a conviction. The city that killed the philosopher needs philosophy more than ever, but not just conversation in the agora, something long-term, disciplined, guided, something that can shape minds the way a sculptor shapes marble.
He begins to write, not as a historian, for Socrates was more than a sequence of events, not as a preacher, for truth cannot be forced, but as a dramatist of ideas, building dialogues where Socrates lives again, where questions unfold like petals, where the reader is drawn into a conversation that began long before them and will continue long after. The dialogues flow, gentle, challenging, playful, sharp. Through them, Plato shapes memory into something fertile, not a monument to the past, but a foundation for the future. And slowly, he gathers students. Some come for arguments, some come for clarity, some come because they too feel the world cracking beneath easy answers. And Plato begins to imagine a place for them, a place of study, of inquiry, of mental discipline and moral growth. Not a school like others, something new, something fitting for the work ahead. This is where we leave him now, a man transformed by loss, steadied by travel, sharpened by reflection, preparing to give philosophy a home it has never had before. The city has changed, Plato has changed, and the world is waiting quietly for the next great step of his mind. The years roll on, and with them Plato's restless search for a place where wisdom and power might finally shake hands. But Athens, beloved, maddening Athens, remains unchanged in one essential way. It listens beautifully and acts terribly. So Plato leaves again. This time his journey carries him far across the sea, to the island of Sicily, glowing like a jewel in the central Mediterranean. He arrives in Syracuse, a city of theaters and tyrants, whose marble palaces overlook a deep blue harbor. Here, philosophers are rare, but ambition is not. Power coats the air like incense. The ruler of the city, Dionysius the Elder, is a man of iron will, suspicion, and pleasure. His court is filled with poets, flatterers, generals, schemers, and into this world walks Plato, robed in simplicity, carrying nothing but ideas. He is invited by a young nobleman named Dion, earnest and intelligent, who dreams that Syracuse could become a city ruled by philosophy rather than fear. Dion sees in Plato a guide, a mentor, perhaps even a savior for his troubled homeland. And so, Plato begins the unlikely work of a political physician, trying to nudge a tyrant toward virtue. At first, there is curiosity. The tyrant listens, amused by this Athenian who speaks of justice with such calm conviction. But curiosity cools quickly when philosophy touches nerves, for tyrants love hearing of virtue until it threatens their comfort. Whispers begin. Plato is watched. The court tightens around him like a velvet trap. Soldiers notice his walks. Servants fall silent when he enters a room. Syracuse, once dazzling, begins to feel like a gilded cage.
And then, one day, the truth becomes sharp enough to cut him. Dionysius has tired of the philosopher. Stories differ on what happened next. Perhaps Plato was nearly killed. Perhaps he was sold into temporary slavery. Perhaps he escaped through friends, or by luck, or by the protective influence of Dion. The details bend through time like heat over desert stone, but one thing is certain. Plato leaves Syracuse wounded, disillusioned, yet strangely unbroken. For philosophy had been tested not in the polite terrain of conversation, but in the furnace of politics, and politics had nearly consumed him.
He returns to Greece older, marked, wiser. He has seen too clearly what unchecked power becomes. He has learned the limits of persuading a man who believes himself a god. And beneath the disappointment, something new begins to take shape. Conviction sharpened into purpose. If kings will not become philosophers, then perhaps philosophers must create a place where they can train kings. Plato returns to Athens with this seed burning inside him, a vision still fragile but alive. And so begins his great work of building, of teaching, of shaping minds. But that, dear listener, is the path we will walk next. Breathe now, slowly. Let the sea winds of Sicily drift away. Let the tension of tyrants dissolve. In your mind's quiet, imagine Plato back in Athens, looking toward the future with calm determination. Night settles over Athens, soft and blue. The kind of night where oil lamps flicker like thinking minds. Plato sits alone at a low wooden table. A scroll lies open. A reed pen rests between his fingers. And for a long while, nothing moves. He isn't stuck. He's listening, not to the silence, but to memory. Socrates' voice lingers in him like a warm ember refusing to fade. The questions, the rhythm, the gentle persistence, it's all still there, just waiting for a place to live again. Plato dips his pen in ink. Not to write philosophy, not yet. Not to write doctrine, he isn't ready. But to write Socrates. To save him. To bring him back. To give the city and the world the conversations Athens silenced. The first strokes on the scroll are tentative, then firmer, then confident, flowing, alive. He writes not as a politician or a teacher or a historian, but as someone building a home for a voice he refuses to lose. His dialogues take the shape of conversations, real ones, remembered ones, imagined ones. Scenes unfold in the gymnasiums, the stoa, the riverbanks, the dusty roads. Socrates lives again, always questioning, always seeking, always mid-stride toward truth. Plato doesn't present him as a saint or a hero. He presents him as he was, stubborn, curious, humane, baffling, brilliant. But something subtle begins to change. Dialogue by dialogue, Plato's own thinking starts to join the dance. His ideas, still young, still forming, enter the conversations like a second voice playing in harmony with the first. Sometimes he hides behind Socrates. Sometimes he lets Socrates question him. Sometimes he lets Socrates fall silent so another speaker can carry the thought. The result is unlike anything Athens has ever seen. A new literary form begins to take shape, part drama, part philosophy, part memory, part mirror. These works are not meant to be recited on stages. They are meant to be lived with, returned to, wrestled with. They are philosophical journeys in miniature. Each one begins with something small, almost ordinary. What is piety? What is courage? What is friendship? What is virtue? What does it mean to speak truth? And each question grows into something larger, something that points beyond the city, beyond the shifting world of appearances, towards something clearer, more stable, more real. The dialogues become Plato's way of grieving, and of building, and of teaching.
not by telling the reader what to think, but by drawing them into the search, by letting them walk beside Socrates on the dusty roads and feel the discomfort of not knowing, by showing them arguments that sparkle and arguments that collapse, often in the same breath. The academy has begun, yes, but the dialogues are the soul of Plato's mission. They carry the two worlds he holds inside him: Socrates, the living question; Plato, the architect of ideas. This dual voice becomes the heartbeat of his work. Through the Apology, he preserves Socrates' dignity in the face of death. Through the Credo, he preserves Socrates' respect for law, even unjust law. Through the Symposium, he preserves Socrates' strange, intoxicating relationship with love and truth. Through the Republic, he goes further, imagining a world that doesn't exist yet, a world shaped by justice, order, and philosophical clarity. Some Athenians scoff, some students adore him, some don't understand a word.
But Plato isn't writing for the applause of his time. He's writing for the ones who will come after, for the restless minds, the quiet observers, the ones who wrestle with unseen truths, the ones who feel that questions are better companions than answers. He doesn't know it yet, but the scrolls he fills in the soft lamplight will become some of the most enduring works ever written. Texts preserved across empires, carried by monks, copied by scholars, studied by rulers, debated by centuries. Socrates died, but Plato refuses to let his death be the end of the story. Through the dialogues, the gadfly still walks, still questions, still unsettles, still awakens. And Plato, in the privacy of his room, reed pen in hand, feels something unexpected, a quiet peace, as if by writing, he's not only preserving his teacher, but becoming the thinker Socrates always believed he could be. The years at the academy pass, and Plato becomes not only a teacher, but a kind of quiet force, a man shaping minds in the same city that once destroyed his own teacher. And yet, for all his devotion to thought, Plato cannot forget politics. No true student of Socrates ever could. Athens remains turbulent, proud, wounded, brilliant, inconsistent, a city always halfway between genius and self-destruction. As Plato teaches his students that reason must guide the soul, he watches his city struggle to follow even its own laws. He sees talented orators sway the assembly with emotion rather than truth. He sees capable men sidelined and reckless men rewarded. And he feels, as he has felt since his youth, that philosophy belongs in the governing of a city, not as rhetoric, not as flattery, but as wisdom. This tension between the thinker and the citizen grows inside him like a knot. One day, a messenger arrives at the academy. He brings news from Sicily, from the island where Plato had once traveled in his younger years. The tyrant of Syracuse is dead. His son, Dionysius the Younger, has taken the throne, a young ruler, untested, uncertain, surrounded by flatterers and opportunists. And there is Dion, Plato's old friend, the one who had first urged him years before to engage in Sicilian politics. Dion still believes in the dream of a philosopher king, still believes in Plato's ability to guide a young ruler toward wisdom. He asks Plato to return. Plato hesitates. His students beg him not to go. They tell him Athens needs him. They remind him of Socrates' fate. They warn him that tyrants love philosophy only when it flatters them, not when it challenges them. But Plato also remembers the moment Socrates drank the hemlock. He remembers feeling helpless, seeing the world as it is when the wise refuse to act. He knows he cannot simply write about just government forever. He must at least try to help shape one. So Plato leaves Athens once more.
The voyage to Sicily is long, and the sea carries him between two worlds, the world of ideas he teaches in the academy and the world of politics, raw and unpredictable. When he arrives in Syracuse, he is welcomed with ceremony. The young tyrant listens to him eagerly. For a moment, it feels as if the dream might live, a ruler guided not by appetite or ambition, but by reason. But dreams, Plato learns, can be fragile things. At first, the young Dionysius listens to Plato with reverence. He asks questions about virtue, justice, the good life. He praises philosophy. He claims he wants to be a just ruler. But as weeks turn to months, Plato begins to see the fractures. The young tyrant enjoys the image of wisdom more than the hard discipline of it. He likes being admired, but he does not like being corrected. His court whispers around him, jealous of Plato's influence, fearful of losing their privileges. Dionysius grows paranoid. Dion falls into disfavor, and soon Plato finds himself caught between friendship, idealism, and a ruler who becomes more unpredictable with each passing day. Eventually, he is not a guest at all. He is a hostage, held in Syracuse until the young tyrant decides what to do with him. The dream of a philosopher king cracks, slowly, painfully. And yet, even in this strange captivity, Plato continues to speak calmly, carefully, trying to draw the young Dionysius toward wisdom. He does not flatter, he does not beg. He speaks to the tyrant the way he spoke to the students in Athens, with patience and conviction. But the court wants blood. They whisper that Plato is dangerous, that he seeks to control the ruler, that philosophy is a threat. At last, through a chain of friends and allies, and perhaps through the influence of the Pythagoreans in southern Italy, Plato is released. He returns to Athens, older, more burdened, yet strangely clearer in his convictions. He has tried to shape a ruler with words. He has seen the limits of philosophy in the halls of power, and he has realized something that will echo through the rest of his writings. A city cannot be reformed from the top down. A tyrant cannot be taught justice as if it were geometry. A soul must be shaped long before it holds power. Philosophy must begin in childhood, in education, in the formation of character, long before crowns and titles.
So Plato returns to the one place where he knows he can make the deepest mark, the academy. There, beneath the olive trees, he will teach again. There he will refine his great dialogues. There he will train not kings, but minds, the future thinkers who will question, challenge, and shape the world long after he is gone. He has seen what politics can do to philosophy. Now he dedicates his life to showing what philosophy can do to the soul.
The wind over the Aegean is gentler now, softer than the winds that once filled the sails for Plato's journeys across Sicily and back. Athens lies ahead, not the brilliant, confident city it once was, but still the city that shaped him, the city he cannot help but love. Its skyline, crowned by the Acropolis, rises like an old friend seen from afar, familiar, worn, still holding its dignity. Plato steps onto the harbor stones at Piraeus, a little older, a little more weathered, a little more certain of what kind of life he must now lead. He has seen too much, the tyranny of ideas without virtue, the seduction of power without wisdom, the fragility of good intentions when faced with human fear. Yet he has also seen glimpses of what might be possible, the clarity of mathematical truth, the harmony of a just soul, the potential of a young city or a young mind shaped by philosophy rather than ambition. The city greets him with the same mixture of noise and melancholy he left behind. Merchants shout prices, sailors argue, carts rattle over the stones. But behind the noise, something quieter moves, a question perhaps waiting for him to answer. Plato returns to the friends who remain, the faithful ones who survived the political storms, the ones who kept studying, kept thinking, kept the conversations alive. They greet him with joy that is gentle, not loud. They sense his disappointment in Sicily, a disappointment that does not need words. They speak instead of Athens, of the young men hungry for guidance, of a renewed desire among some circles to think again about justice, virtue, and the good life. And so Plato does what perhaps he was always meant to do. He begins to teach, not as the sophists teach, selling lessons like wares in a market, but in the spirit of Socrates, open, searching, honest. He gathers students in gardens and porches, in shaded rooms and under the long colonnades where footsteps echo softly. These are not formal lectures, they are conversations shaped by the same questions that once moved him as a young listener at Socrates' side. But soon it becomes clear that conversation alone is not enough. Athens is fragile again, caught between nostalgia for its lost greatness and the uneasy pragmatism of the present. The young need more than occasional talks. They need a place, a structure, a path. They need a home for philosophy. Plato begins looking for such a place, somewhere quiet enough for thought, yet close enough to the pulse of the city to matter. He finds it just outside the city walls, a grove dedicated long ago to the hero Academos. It is peaceful there, olive trees whispering in the breeze, soft earth underfoot, the hum of cicadas weaving through the air. A few simple buildings are added, rooms for discussion, walls for shelter, open space for walking as ideas take shape. There is nothing grand about it, no marble, no gold, just the dignity of purpose. And with that, the academy is born, the first of its kind, the seed of every university that will ever exist, a monument not of stone, but of thought. Students come, drawn by curiosity, by admiration, or by rumor of the man who writes dialogues like living conversations, dialogues in which Socrates still speaks, questioning, guiding, provoking. Young minds bring questions that echo Plato's own. What is justice? What is the good? What is the soul? What is the highest form of knowledge? Plato walks with them beneath the olive branches. He speaks of forms, the eternal patterns behind the shifting world. He speaks of the good, the source of all truth and all meaning, as the sun is the source of all light. He speaks of the just state, a city ruled not by power or wealth, but by wisdom. But he also listens. For he remembers Socrates, and no matter how many books he writes or how much his reputation grows, he refuses to forget that wisdom begins in humility. The academy grows. Its reputation spreads. Some students come from far beyond Athens. Some will become statesmen, some teachers, some quiet thinkers. And one young man, Aristotle, will one day walk through its gates, absorbing ideas that will help shape the next great chapter of philosophy. Plato observes them all with a quiet, steady pride. Not pride in himself, but in the possibility that a city, a person, even a world can be shaped by the disciplined pursuit of truth. Yet even amid this success, he remains haunted by the same question that once troubled Socrates. Can philosophy truly guide a city? Can justice survive power? Can the good survive human weakness? He does not know. He never claims certainty. Instead, he keeps writing, keeps teaching, keeps refining his vision of a life shaped by reason and virtue. In the evenings, when the grove quiets and students drift home, Plato sometimes sits alone beneath the branches. The light softens, the city hum grows distant, and in the stillness, he feels the presence of his old teacher, not as a ghost, but as a method, a memory, a standard of integrity. Socrates may be gone, but the questioning continues, and Plato, now firmly in his life's purpose, continues the work that began in the agora so many years ago. The academy stands, philosophy breathes, and Athens, for a moment, feels like a city where wisdom might still matter. The ship cuts quietly through the dark blue water of the Aegean, its wooden hull groaning softly, its sail catching steady wind. Plato stands at the railing, older now, his face seasoned by travel, by disappointment, by the aching lessons of Sicily. Athens rises in the distance, pale stone, bright sun, a city he left full of ideals and returns to with something deeper, determination. The city he comes home to is not the one of his youth. Its politics are restless, still trembling from faction and war. Philosophers gossip in courtyards, orators sharpen their arguments for the assembly. Young men drift through the agora searching for someone to teach them how to live. And through all this, the memory of Socrates lingers like a quiet, persistent echo. Plato feels it as soon as his feet touch the docks. Athens needs a place where philosophy can live without fear. Not only as talk, not only as clever argument, but as a way of life. His own life begins to form around this idea. He starts by writing, slowly, carefully, patiently. In a small room lit by a single oil lamp, he arranges his thoughts like a mason fitting stones. Not treatises, not lectures, but dialogues, conversations that breathe with the memory of Socrates. In these pages, Socrates lives again, questioning, pushing, revealing the fragile foundations beneath people's confidence. These works travel quickly through Athens. People read them aloud in the gymnasia, in private gardens, in shaded porticos where students gather. Plato becomes known not only as the student of Socrates, but as someone crafting a vision of what the examined life could be. Yet, he is restless. He has seen how fragile cities are, how easily they fall to flattery, to ambition, to the hunger for power. He has watched rulers fail not because they were evil, but because they did not understand themselves. Philosophy, he thinks, must not be kept indoors. It must shape the way people live together. And so he walks the olive grove outside the walls of Athens, a calm place, blessed by legend, where the hero Academos once received a great oracle. The trees whisper in the breeze, cicadas chant their patient rhythm, and for Plato, something clicks into place. A school, a sanctuary, a community of inquiry, a place where young men can learn not merely to argue, but to think, to live, to govern themselves. He opens the academy. It begins modestly, a few followers, a shaded path, the open air serving as both roof and invitation, but it grows quickly. Students come from across Greece, drawn by the idea of a place where the mind can stretch as far as it likes. They debate geometry beneath olive branches. They trace the proofs of Pythagoreans in the sand. They test each other's arguments, challenge each other's certainty, cultivate a discipline of mind that answers not to popularity, but to truth. And Plato, quiet, patient, thoughtful, guides them not like a general, but like a gardener. He shows them how to inquire, not what to believe. He teaches them that the soul needs training just as the body does, that clarity is a kind of courage, and that no city can flourish unless its rulers are ruled first by reason. As the decades roll on, the academy becomes something Athens has never seen before, a home for philosophy. A place where questions can survive the heat of politics. A school that will last centuries beyond the man who founded it. But Plato is not finished. He writes more, dialogues that wrestle with the nature of justice, the structure of the soul, the architecture of a good society. He explores metaphysics, the nature of knowledge, the delicate ladder by which the mind ascends from shadows toward light. And always, always, Socrates speaks through him, urging, probing, guiding. To many, Plato becomes a philosopher of reason. To some, a mystic of ideal forms.
to others the architect of a political dream too pure for any city to hold. But for Plato himself, the work is simpler: to continue the task Socrates began, to teach humans how to examine their lives, and through that examination, to become free. Imagine Athens in late afternoon, the sun lowering behind the hill of the nymphs, turning the dust in the air into a soft veil of gold. A breeze drifts in from the sea, carrying the faint smell of salt and the promise of evening coolness. Outside the city walls, in a sacred grove once dedicated to the hero Academos, young men and older thinkers gather beneath the trees, not for exercise alone, and not for worship, but for the work of the mind. This is the Academy, Plato's Academy, the first institution of its kind in Western history, a school, a sanctuary, a workshop for ideas. But it does not look like a school in the modern sense. There are no classrooms, no rows of desks, no chalkboards or lecture halls. The Academy is a living place, a patch of earth, a cluster of marble walkways, a gymnasium, shaded porticos, scattered benches, and open air. Students come and go in sandals, some carrying wax tablets, others bringing nothing but curiosity. And at the center of it all is Plato, now middle-aged, calm in bearing, broad of mind even if not of physique, his voice steady, his demeanor patient. He does not command, he invites. A radical promise. Plato founded the Academy with a promise almost audacious for its time, that the life of the mind could be trained, that virtue could be cultivated, that wisdom was not merely a gift of the gods, but a skill, a craft, shaped through discussion, study, and disciplined thought. And, just as importantly, that philosophy was not a hobby, it was a way of life. Students come from across the Greek world, sons of aristocrats, sons of farmers, future mathematicians, aspiring statesmen, quiet dreamers who believe that truth is something worth chasing even if it never fully stands still. They gather in small circles, debating by the olive trees, walking in pairs along the gravel paths, or sitting in the shade reading scrolls passed from hand to hand. A place of many disciplines. For Plato, philosophy is not a narrow subject. It is the thread running through everything. So the Academy becomes a place of many studies. Mathematics, seen as the bridge between the material world and the world of perfect truth. Astronomy, to understand the order of the heavens. Music, for the harmony of the soul. Ethics and politics, for the harmony of cities. And dialectic, the crown of all learning, the art of questioning, examining, refining, and seeking truth. He famously inscribes, whether literally or in spirit, a warning above the entrance. Let no one ignorant of geometry enter. Not because he cares only for numbers, but because he believes that the mind must be trained in clarity, precision, and the pursuit of unchanging truths. Teaching without teaching. And Plato himself? He does not lecture the way later teachers will. Instead, he asks questions. He listens. He challenges gently, the way a sculptor shapes marble with patient taps rather than wild blows. He often teaches through stories, myths crafted not as literal tales, but as vessels for meaning. The myth of the charioteer and the two horses, the cave where shadows pretend to be truth, images that carry lessons long after the speaker is silent. Students argue with him freely. Some disagree openly. In the Academy, disagreement is not a threat, it is a tool. A good argument is a compliment. It shows engagement, not disrespect. And through these exchanges, an idea takes shape, that knowledge is not something poured into a student, but something drawn out of them. Just as Socrates awakens something in young Plato, Plato now awakens something in all who come to learn. The academy as a living legacy. Seasons turn. Young men grow older. Some leave for public life. Others stay and become teachers themselves. The academy develops its own customs, rhythms, and identity. Not a rigid institution, but a growing family of inquiry. In time, the academy's influence stretches far beyond Athens. Its methods spread. Its reputation deepens. Its students carry its spirit into politics, mathematics, astronomy, philosophy, and statesmanship. And through it all, Plato remains its quiet center, listening, questioning, guiding, never claiming he possesses truth, only that he is committed to seeking it. At sunset, when the students drift away and the grove grows quiet, Plato sometimes walks the paths alone. Perhaps he thinks of Socrates. Perhaps he wonders whether the academy lives up to the example of the man who asked questions beneath the colonnades of Athens. Or perhaps he simply watches the last light fade from the sky and feels gratitude that the work of the mind, once dismissed as idle speculation, now has a home. A place where questions can breathe. A place where truth can be pursued without fear. A place where philosophy becomes a shared life. The academy stands, marble, trees, voices, as Plato's great gift to the world. A place where thought becomes tradition, where conversation becomes legacy, where inquiry becomes a kind of immortality.
The ship leaves Syracuse behind, its hull cutting a slow line across the dark water. Plato stands at the stern for a long while, watching the island shrink into a pale blur. The wind moves through his cloak, cool and steady, as if the sea itself were urging him toward home, toward Athens, toward the academy, toward the work that has always been his true calling. By the time he returns, the city feels both familiar and changed. Athens has never been a place of stillness. Philosophers debate in the Stoa, merchants argue over prices, children chase each other between columns, and at every corner someone is proclaiming a new truth or mocking an old one. Yet there is something in the air, a sense that the fever of politics has cooled just enough to allow quiet thought again. The academy, his academy, waits for him like an old friend. The olive trees sway gently around the sacred grove. The familiar path crunches underfoot. Students gather at the entrance, first whispering when they see him, then breaking into smiles. They crowd around him with questions, relief, and a kind of reverence that Plato never entirely grows used to. Inside the grounds, the rhythms of study resume almost immediately. Chalk against tablets, low voices in debate, the rustle of papyrus. Plato moves among his students like a calm center point, the one presence in the academy that seems untouched by the chaos of the world beyond its walls. He does not speak at length about Syracuse. He rarely mentions Dionysus at all. Instead, he turns the experience into something quieter and more lasting, a reflection embedded in the dialogues he begins to write in the years that follow. In these works, he sharpens ideas that have lived inside him since youth. He examines how power can seduce even the intelligent, how philosophy must train the soul long before it guides the state, how a city cannot be made virtuous from the top down, but must grow from the character of its citizens. And above all, he affirms a truth born from pain. Ideal rulers must love wisdom more than authority. Time in the academy stretches into a gentle pattern. Mornings filled with discussion, afternoons spent walking the grounds, lecturing beneath the shade of trees, evenings writing, refining, shaping dialogues that will echo long after his voice is quiet.
His students change with the generations. Some arrive sharp and skeptical, others come gentle, curious, ready to learn. Some remain with him for decades.
Others leave quickly, taking pieces of the academy with them into the world. Among them all, one stands out, not yet famous, not yet fully formed, but already prodigious: Aristotle, the eager young mind from Macedon, who arrives years later. But that is still to come. For now, Plato dwells in a season of relative peace. He writes the Republic, exploring the shape of a just soul and a just city. He writes the Phaedrus, speaking of the wings of the mind. He writes the Symposium, filled with voices praising love from every angle. He writes of justice, courage, desire, knowledge, the soul, weaving each dialogue with a quiet grace, as if composing not only philosophy, but a kind of spiritual map for anyone who seeks a better life. Athens may be loud, impatient, and ever-changing, but within the academy, the air is steady. Ideas take root, discussions deepen. Students learn to examine themselves before examining others. And Plato, calmer now, seasoned by disappointment but strengthened by conviction, becomes something he never intended to be: a guide not just for his time, but for all time. As the evening light fades across the courtyard, he sits with a small group of students beneath the branches of an old olive tree. They ask him how the world might change, whether a just city will ever exist, whether it is worth striving for something so often thwarted by human nature. Plato listens, the faintest smile touching his face. His answer, when it comes, is soft. Perhaps the city will not change, but you can, and through you, the world may follow. The students fall silent, letting the words settle. The sky deepens into indigo. Lamps are lit, scrolls are gathered, and as the academy drifts toward night, Plato remains seated beneath the branches, a man who has traveled far, lost much, learned more, and returned to the place where thought becomes hope. The dream of a better world continues, quietly, steadily, within the walls he built. The years drift on, quiet as afternoon shadows moving across the courtyard stones. Plato is no longer the young man listening wide-eyed at Socrates' side, nor the restless traveler seeking models of good government in foreign lands. He is now a teacher in his own right, though he would smile at the word teacher. He prefers to guide rather than instruct, to lead minds to questions rather than fill them with answers. The academy grows around him like a living mind, a place where conversation becomes architecture and curiosity becomes a daily practice. Students come from every corner of the Greek world, from aristocrats with polished sandals to earnest youths whose families saved for years just to send them here. They come seeking wisdom, and they leave with an appetite for more. Plato walks among them with soft steps, robes brushing lightly against the gravel paths. Age has refined him rather than dulled him. His voice is calm, never hurried. When he speaks, the students lean in slightly, not because he demands attention, but because he offers it. He begins many lessons not with a lecture, but with a story, about a cave where shadows masquerade as truth, about a charioteer trying to guide two horses, one noble, one wild, about souls that forget what they once knew and must recall it through learning. These images settle into the minds of his students, stirring something deeper than mere logic, a recognition. Plato smiles sometimes when he sees that moment, when a student's eyes widen with understanding, not because they've memorized an argument, but because they've remembered something true. The academy becomes a place where disciplines merge. Geometry is studied not only for its shapes, but for the clarity it brings to thinking. Music is practiced not just for performance, but for harmony of mind. Ethics is not merely discussed, it is lived. Philosophy here is not a profession, but a way of walking through the world. And yet, Plato carries within him a tension he never completely resolves, his longing for a just society. He still believes, quietly, stubbornly, that reason might guide politics, that virtue might anchor power. But he also knows how easily crowds are swayed, how quickly fear can drown wisdom, how human desires shape cities more than ideals do.
Sometimes, late in the evening, he stands alone beneath the olive trees, watching torches flicker along Athens' roads. He thinks of Socrates, not with grief, but with a soft, enduring gratitude. The man who asked questions without fear. The man who taught him that philosophy is not a refuge from life, but a guide through it. In the academy, Plato tries to keep that spirit alive. Students debate without hostility, explore ideas without shame, and seek truth without bending it to convenience. It is a fragile thing they are building, a sanctuary of thought in a world that often prefers certainty to inquiry. But it endures. Visitors come and go. Some leave impressed, others leave puzzled. A few leave transformed. Plato himself remains steady, shaping dialogues that will travel through centuries like lanterns carried through the dark. He writes not to preach, but to preserve the life of conversation, the voice of Socrates, speaking through characters who never quite settle anything, who never quite let the mind rest. Even in age, Plato continues to refine his ideas. The question of the ideal city still occupies him, a puzzle he turns over like a stone in his hands. Is justice a structure? A harmony? A balance? Perhaps it is all of these. Perhaps it is something that can exist perfectly only in thought, yet still inspire imperfect humans to reach. His students, meanwhile, see him as a pillar, unwavering, wise, gentle, but they do not see the private struggles, the quiet doubts. Plato knows that truth is not owned, it is approached, and every day he approaches it again. In the warm evenings, the academy hums with low conversations. Someone practices a geometric proof in the portico. Someone else recites a line from Pindar. A small group debates the soul, where it comes from, where it goes. Lanterns cast amber halos across the stone walls. This is Plato's world, a world held together not by force, but by thought. A world where questions are the foundation stones. A world called the Academy, a place that will echo far into distant ages, long after the olive groves have withered and the marble columns have fallen. Plato watches his students walking in pairs beneath the fading light. He feels the familiar mixture of hope and humility. Teaching, he knows, is planting seeds whose growth he may never witness, but he plants them anyway, patiently, faithfully, just as Socrates once planted seeds in him. Now, breathe gently. Let the image settle. The quiet grove, the murmuring minds, the master of the academy walking slowly between the columns. Wisdom here is not loud. It is steady. It is patient. It waits for those who are willing to approach. Night falls softly over the academy. Lamps glow in small clay bowls, their flames shivering in the warm attic breeze. Students drift away in pairs and trios, still discussing the day's questions, the good, the nature of the soul, the geometry that seems to whisper hints of the divine. And Plato, now older, now fully in the shape of the man history will remember, remains seated beneath the ancient olive tree that has become his quiet companion. The evening air carries the smell of earth and jasmine. Somewhere in the distance, a shepherd's flute plays a wandering melody. It is in this gentle darkness that Plato does what he has always done: think, and let the question beneath all questions rise to the surface of his mind. What is reality? What is appearance?
What is the nature of the world itself? He watches the lamp's flame dance, spreading warm light on the courtyard stones, and suddenly, as sometimes happens with him, an image unfolds in his mind. A story, simple but sharp, like a knife that cuts through confusion. A story that will outlive him. A cave. A dark, underground chamber where people sit chained, facing a wall. Behind them, a fire burns, and between the fire and the prisoners, objects pass, carried by unseen hands. The prisoners see only shadows, and hearing echoes, they believe them to be the voices of the shadows themselves. These shadows become their world, their truth, their reality. For what else have they ever known? And then, he imagines, if one prisoner breaks free, what then? The pain, the blinding light, the shock of seeing real objects instead of silhouettes, the trembling ascent to the surface, the blazing sun, the flood of truth that overturns every assumption, and finally, the tragic return, the effort to tell the others that the shadows are not the whole of things, the confusion, the laughter, the rejection. Plato closes his eyes. The allegory feels alive, as if it were not merely a thought, but a memory, a message, a warning. People cling to shadows. Cities cling to shadows, sometimes willingly.
Even Athens. He thinks of Socrates, his teacher, his guide, who tried to drag an entire city toward the light, and who died for that courage. Plato feels again the ache of that loss, but over the years it has changed shape. Once it was grief, then anger, then disillusionment. Now it has become something steadier, deeper, a commitment, a vow, a responsibility. Socrates had fought the shadows with questions. Plato will fight them with questions and visions, with structured thought, with rigorous argument, with stories that reveal truth by showing it sideways. The academy itself is his answer to the cave, a place where young minds can be gently unchained, where they can turn toward the light not through force, but through desire, where philosophy is not the eccentric pursuit of a lone man, but a shared project, a community of inquiry, united by the belief that the human soul can grow, can ascend, can learn to see clearly. He listens to the faint rustling of leaves overhead. The night sky stretches above him, studded with stars, silent, ancient, moving in their eternal patterns. He has begun to suspect that the movements of the heavens are not merely beautiful, but meaningful, that the structure of the cosmos reflects the structure of truth itself, that to grasp the order of the universe is to grasp something of the good, the source of all knowledge, all being, all value. The fire of thought burns quietly within him, bright but calm. He knows some mock his ideas, others misunderstand them. Some cling to the world of sense, to the world of noise and appetite, unable or unwilling to imagine something higher, something more real than what eyes can see. But Plato does not rush, he does not demand, he simply writes. He crafts dialogues like little worlds, each one an invitation to turn, even a little, toward the light. And as he sits alone in the courtyard, the smell of olives and warm stone around him, he realizes something gently profound. Truth is not something one man can give to another. Truth is something one soul helps another to remember. Like a midwife, he thinks softly to himself, helping the mind give birth to what it already carries within. He smiles. He remembers that Socrates, too, called himself a midwife of the soul. Perhaps this is the inheritance he values most, not the questions themselves, but the manner of asking them. The wind shifts slightly. A lamp flickers. The academy is quiet now. Plato lifts his eyes to the stars, the same stars that watched over Socrates, the same stars that will one day watch over countless students who will walk these same paths, speak these same questions, search for these same truths. There is work still to do,
more dialogues to write, more students to guide, more arguments to refine. But for tonight, he lets the silence settle, lets the shadows and the light coexist gently in his mind. For philosophy, he knows, is not a sprint toward answers. It is a lifelong turning of the soul. He breathes out, slow and calm. Another day of thinking, teaching, wrestling with truth is done. And tomorrow, as always, he will begin again.